"You're not in the will," my stepmother said, voice sharp enough to slice air. "That's not what Dad would have wanted," my brother replied, almost whispering. "Intent doesn't matter, only signatures do," the lawyer murmured, avoiding my eyes. "I'll wait until you finish," I said, my hands resting on my lap. Inside, I promised myself one thing: the times signed will times would speak again. The fridge hummed from the kitchen, steady as a breath against the silence. "Stay, let the documents speak first." The house smelled faintly of Lysol and roses, a mix that didn't belong together. We were gathered in the same living room where Dad used to host his Sunday crossword marathons. Today, the air carried tension instead of laughter. The folder on the lawyer's lap looked thin, too thin for a lifetime of work and love. My stepmother sat on the couch like a queen at a coronation. "Your father made revisions," she announced. "Given how little time you spent here, it's fair." I watched dust float through the beam of afternoon light. "He never mentioned new revisions to me," I said quietly. She leaned forward. "Well, grief makes people forget. Or imagine." Her words didn't sting as much as they used to. I had prepared for this theater. Dad always believed the truth could outlast performance. He signed everything twice, once for his attorney and once for his conscience. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carson, perhaps we should proceed." "Read it, then," she said. "Let's end this." Paper rasped as he unfolded the sheets. My father's voice used to fill this room. Now his handwriting had to do it. Each sentence felt shorter than it should have been, like pieces missing from a larger thought. When the lawyer finished, my name wasn't there. Not once. My brother glanced at me, guilt softening his eyes. "Maybe there's another version." "There's only one," my stepmother replied. "And it's in front of us." I didn't argue. I just nodded, memorizing the date typed near the top: 2 months after Dad's final hospital stay. Too neat, too new. The air vent whirred softly overhead. My fingers traced the edge of my notebook. Inside it, I kept small notes Dad used to leave me, tiny reminders to stay steady, not loud. One line stood out now: "Time's truth doesn't melt. It waits." Asterisk. I exhaled. "May I see the notary stamp?" Her lips tightened. "Are you doubting your father's wife?" "I'm respecting my father's record." The lawyer hesitated, then turned the final page. The stamp area was blank. Silence stretched so long I could hear the mantel clock tick. "Must have been scanned wrong," my stepmother said. "The original's in storage." I smiled faintly. "Then I'll wait until it's found." Outside, the sun touched the drapes with a thin line of gold. My father always called that hour his thinking time. I could almost hear him saying, "Times. Patience is how paper wins." Asterisk. The lawyer folded the document carefully. "We'll reconvene next week when the original is located." "Good," I said, standing. My knees shook once, then steadied. She followed me to the hallway. "You're wasting your time. Everything's settled." "Settled things don't need hiding places," I said, keeping my tone even. The fridge door creaked as I passed the kitchen. Its hum deepened as if responding. That sound had been my background music growing up: Dad's hands rearranging leftovers, labeling containers with a black marker. His order, his precision. I reached for my coat on the hook. The fabric felt cool against my palms. My brother lingered near the stairs. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You did what you could," I said. "Now let's see what the papers say." He nodded, relief in his shoulders. "You always find things other people miss." I didn't answer, but he wasn't wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. The clock's steady tick echoed from downstairs. Every breath felt like time marking itself. The lawyer's copy haunted me: no notary, no seal, just clean signatures in unfamiliar ink. Dad's real pen left slight smudges. This one didn't. I turned on the bedside lamp. The air smelled faintly of old paper. On my nightstand sat a framed photo of Dad holding a crossword puzzle. Behind him, the freezer door peeked open, cluttered with frozen casseroles and labeled bags. I remembered his habit of hiding envelopes in odd places so no one could throw them out by accident. Could it be? The thought arrived quietly, without drama, just a thread pulling through memory. Morning came, gray and slow. Rain tapped the porch roof, small and rhythmic. I brewed coffee, its warmth steadying my hands. When the lawyer called to confirm next week's meeting, I asked, "Do you still have the inventory of your client's files?" "Yes," he said, cautious. "Check if a notarized copy was logged 2 years ago. It had a gold seal." He paused. That would match the last revision before hospitalization. I'll check the archive. Thank you, I said. If you find it, let me know right away. After hanging up, I stared at the kitchen floor tiles. One had a small chip near the freezer corner, a detail Dad used to joke about fixing someday. I knelt, touched the cool edge and smiled. It felt like the kind of flaw he'd leave as a sign. The fridge hummed again, low and sure. I opened the freezer just to tidy things. Frost clung to every shelf. Plastic containers lined up in rows, labeled with dates, his handwriting fading but firm. My breath formed a thin cloud. I moved a stack of lasagna trays and saw a shadowed space behind them. Nothing more than a dark patch, yet my heart picked up pace. A voice in my head said, "Time's not yet. Wait until they're all here." Asterisk. So I closed it. Not out of fear but out of respect for timing. I knew then that the truth had survived colder things than deceit. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked wood. I wrote in my notebook, "Times, if they forged heat, I'll answer with ice." Asterisk. The words steadied me. That evening my brother texted, "Times, stepmom wants to move the reading earlier. Be careful." Asterisk. Asterisk. "I'm fine, Times," I replied. Asterisk. "I'll bring something to keep things honest." Asterisk. He didn't ask what. The freezer hummed louder, like a witness clearing its throat. I stood in the doorway, watching condensation bead on the handle. The reflection caught the edge of my father's old gold watch on my wrist, a quiet inheritance, the one no one could steal. Under the steady rhythm of the fridge, I whispered, "Dad, I'm listening." A single drop of melted ice slid down the gasket, catching the light. Sometimes truth doesn't knock. It hums, waits, and thaws on its own time. If you listen closely, you can hear it. When Dad got sick, the house turned into a clock that never stopped ticking. Every drip, every beep marked how fragile things had become. He used to label everything from screw jars to freezer trays. "Order keeps the heart calm," he'd say, writing neat dates on masking tape. When the handwriting on those labels turned shaky, I knew time was changing him. I moved back home to help. My stepmother managed visitors. I managed the oxygen machine, the meals, and the silence between them. She liked control, I liked peace. Dad liked proof, his papers, his signatures, his careful lists. He'd tap my wrist sometimes and whisper, "Freezer keeps things safe. Don't forget." I thought he meant the leftovers. After his funeral, my stepmother took over again, flowers, finances, and finally the will. The reading humiliated me in front of everyone. My name was gone, replaced by hers and my brother's. When I asked to see the notary stamp, the page was blank. "Must have scanned wrong," she said too quickly. The lawyer promised to check the archive, but I already knew something was missing. Dad never left blanks. He signed things twice, once for law and once for conscience. That night I sat alone with a cold cup of coffee. The fridge hummed softly, steady as breath. I opened Dad's old notebook. Among bills and grocery notes was a line in faded ink: "Times, check freezer every Sunday." Asterisk. The words buzzed in my chest. I didn't open it right away. Truth deserved patience. The next morning I called the lawyer. "Did you ever notarize a version from February?" He paused. "There's an entry signed by Linda Marks, your father's nurse. But your stepmother's the executor. I can't release it." "Understood," I said. "Then I'll speak to Linda myself." He exhaled, sounding relieved. "That might help." At work in the library, I moved books in silence. Irene, my coworker, noticed. "Rough week." "Estate reading," I said. "People say money changes family," she sighed. "It doesn't," I replied. "It just shows who was watching." Her smile was small but kind. "You always find what others overlook." That evening I came home to the same hum of machines and memory. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and old paper. I opened the freezer, pretending to tidy. Frost coated every shelf. Behind a row of lasagna trays, I felt something rigid, a plastic folder edge frozen tight. "Not yet," I thought. "Let it wait." I wrote in my notebook, "Times, top right corner, check Sunday." Asterisk. On Sunday morning my brother stopped by. He leaned against the counter. "She says you're dragging this out." "I'm cleaning," I said. "It helps me think." "She'll fight whatever you find." "I'm counting on that." The fridge motor deepened its hum. I slid the trays aside. Beneath them, a clear bag glimmered under frost. Inside, an envelope sealed in duct tape. Dad's handwriting strong, deliberate even now. My brother froze. Is that his will? I said. The real one. He stared, breath fogging the air. It's been here all along. Right where he said things stay safe. He reached for it. I stopped him gently. No heat, no rush. We thaw it right. We set the bag in a bowl of room temperature water. Slowly the frost melted, revealing a gold notary seal and the curve of Dad's signature. The ink blurred at the corners, but the mark held. That's the seal, I whispered. My brother nodded, eyes wide. She can't deny this. She will, I said. But it won't matter. The fridge hummed louder, almost proud. I dried the plastic and slid it into a folder. That night, I wrote everything down: the date, the time, the witness, the condition of the seal. I added a line: Dad would have liked times paper doesn't fight back. It just outlasts noise. Asterisk. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. The clock ticked in even rhythm. For the first time in weeks I felt steady. I touched the cold envelope through the plastic. You were right, Dad, I whispered. The cold keeps truth alive. The second estate meeting drew a bigger audience than the funeral. Neighbors, cousins, and the same family friends who had looked away during the first reading now filled the living room. Everyone wanted to see how far my stepmother's confidence would stretch. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains, catching dust in the air. The smell of coffee mixed with perfume and something sharper, expectation. My brother sat near the wall, quiet and pale. The lawyer, Mr. Blake, arranged his files again and again as though order might calm the room. My stepmother stood by the fireplace wearing black again, though her grief looked more like performance than pain. Let's be quick, she said. There's no need to drag this out. I agree, I replied. Let's make sure everything is read in full this time. Her eyes flicked toward the manila folder under my arm, but she said nothing. Mr. Blake began reading from his copy. His voice trembled slightly. This will dated April 2nd, names Margaret Carson as executor and primary beneficiary. I raised my hand. Before we proceed, could you confirm the notary seal? He turned the pages, brows furrowing. Again it appears blank. Gasps fluttered around the room. My stepmother crossed her arms. We already discussed this. The original is in storage. Then we'll wait for it, I said. Authenticity deserves patience. She laughed softly. You're not in any version, dear. There's no reason to waste the court's time. I met her gaze. Then you shouldn't fear a closer look. The clock on the mantel ticked louder, or maybe my heartbeat did. Mr. Blake sighed and set down the papers. Let's adjourn briefly. I need to clarify the record. Before he could stand, she snatched the pages. You think you can embarrass me again? I stayed seated. No. You're doing that on your own. Her knuckles whitened around the folder. You've always been jealous. You couldn't accept that he moved on. He moved on, I said quietly, not away from honesty. The room went still. Even the air vent seemed to pause. My brother cleared his throat. Maybe we should let the lawyer finish. But it was too late. The damage was done, the kind of silence that stains reputations had already settled. Living room full of witnesses and perfume. I placed my phone on the coffee table, screen recording. If lies fill the air, time stamps will cut through. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed calm. Read every line, Mr. Blake. Let's not skip signatures. The lawyer obeyed. He read slowly, his tone flattening with each word. Every clause favored her: house accounts, jewelry, even Dad's workshop tools. When he finished, he looked at me. Satisfied? Only if you can tell me who notarized it. Names unreadable, he said. Stamp missing. My stepmother waved a manicured hand. We're done. She reached for the door, but Mr. Blake stopped her. Mrs. Carson, until the record is verified, distribution cannot proceed. Her lips tightened. Fine. Verify it. You'll find the same answer. I stood and picked up my phone. Good. We'll all hear it together next week. Her tone dropped. You think one more meeting will change anything? I looked around the room, neighbors pretending to sip coffee, cousins pretending not to record whispers. Truth doesn't change. It only surfaces. She turned away, muttering something about drama. The crowd began to scatter. Mr. Blake pulled me aside. You have something, don't you? Evidence, I said. Still drying. His eyes widened slightly. Then we'll need a witness when you present it. I already have one, I said. Linda Marks, the nurse who notarized the real will. He exhaled. That helps more than you know. As people left, my brother lingered. You sure this is safe? She's furious. I'm not doing it to win, I said. I'm doing it to finish what Dad started. He looked down. He always trusted you more than her. That's what she resented most. The porch door creaked as the last guest left. The air smelled of brewed coffee, turning bitter. Mr. Blake packed his folders, avoiding eye contact. She's going to fight, he said. Let her, I replied. The paper will fight better. That evening, the house felt like it was exhaling. Rain tapped on the porch roof, steady and cleansing. The hum of the fridge filled the space where voices had been. I sat at the kitchen table with a towel under the sealed plastic bag, watching droplets of condensation slide off. The notary seal shimmered under the lamplight, gold, circular, unmistakable. The ink blurred slightly, but the signature remained bold. My father's name carried a weight that even grief couldn't smudge. I called Mr. Blake. I'm ready to submit the original. He sounded careful. Do not transport it in that condition. Bring photos, timestamps, and a written statement first. I've done that already, I said. I'll deliver copies tomorrow. Good. And Miss Marks, the nurse, she's willing to testify. I reached her earlier. A warmth spread through my chest. Then it's time. After we hung up, I opened Dad's old notebook again. On the inside cover, a faint pencil note read, Times, the freezer remembers longer than people do. Asterisk. I smiled through tears. You always planned one move ahead, didn't you? The clock ticked toward midnight. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked wood. I wiped the table, folded the towel, and placed the bag in the fridge to thaw slowly overnight. Morning brought soft gray light through the curtains. My brother texted, Times, she's calling everyone she knows. Says you forged it. Asterisk. Then she's nervous, Mal, I replied. Asterisk. Be careful, Times, he added. Asterisk. She's angry enough to make trouble. Asterisk. I typed back, Times. Proof doesn't yell. It repeats. Asterisk. He didn't answer, but I knew he'd be there when the next meeting came. By afternoon, I was at the notary office. Linda Marks greeted me with tired eyes but a steady handshake. Your father was one of the good ones, she said. He read every word before signing. Do you still have your logbook? She nodded, pulling a leather-bound journal from her drawer. February 17th, page 82. Signature John Carson. The entry sat beside her own initials and the gold stamp ID. My throat tightened. Would you be willing to confirm this publicly? She smiled. I already told Mr. Blake I would. He called first thing this morning. Thank you, I whispered. She patted my hand. He trusted you for a reason. The air inside the office smelled faintly of ink and sanitizer. I left feeling lighter, though the road ahead was steep. The truth was finally thawing, and no accusation could refreeze it. That night I sat by the window with my father's watch ticking faintly on my wrist. The sound blended with the fridge hum, the two rhythms syncing like proof and memory. I wrote in my journal, Times, tomorrow we speak on record. Let the cold truth warm the room. Asterisk. The rain outside eased to a drizzle. A faint light flickered from the street lamp, glinting off the plastic folder. The seal caught it, perfectly gold against quiet. For once I didn't feel small. I felt steady, like the truth itself had finally chosen its time. Dad's voice echoed in memory, Times, never rush justice. It has its own temperature. Asterisk. I whispered back, it's warm enough now. After the second reading, the house turned hollow again. The chairs were empty, the coffee pot cold, and the walls echoed every word my stepmother had thrown at me. Outside, rain whispered through the gutters. Inside, the fridge hummed steadily, the only sound that didn't lie. I sat at the table, staring at the folder, holding the thawed will. The paper had dried perfectly, edges curled, signature intact. The seal glimmered like truth waiting its turn. For the first time since Dad died, I felt tired instead of angry. My brother called that night. She's furious, he said. She told everyone you stole the document. I didn't, I replied softly. I know, he said. But people like her count on noise. They think truth depends on volume. She's not wrong, I said. It takes patience for people to hear quiet things. He hesitated. You sure you want to go through with the hearing? Yes. Dad's name deserves a clean record. He sighed. All right. I'll stand with you even if she cuts me off. Then we'll both be free, I said. After hanging up, I leaned back and closed my eyes. The smell of coffee and paper mixed in the air. I had done everything right, preserved the evidence, gathered witnesses, documented the timeline. Yet a flicker of doubt still moved under my ribs. What if I had misread him? What if Dad had changed his mind but never told me? The thought made my throat tighten. I opened his notebook again, looking for something, anything that spoke directly to this moment. Near the back was a list of grocery items and one odd line: times. Keep seal dry, story survives. Asterisk. I smiled weakly. That was his way of saying he trusted paper more than memory. The mantel clock ticked slow and even. The house smelled faintly of lemon polish, the kind my stepmother used after every confrontation. She believed scent erased guilt. I believed it just covered it. The next morning, I forced myself to return to the library. Routine felt safer than reflection. The fluorescent lights hummed and the old copier clicked with a rhythm that almost soothed me. Irene noticed the fatigue in my face. You look like you slept through a storm, she said. I did, I answered. And I'm still drying out. She nodded, shelving a row of hardcovers. When you finally get peace, it'll be quiet. You'll know. Do you believe in justice? I asked. I believe in documents, she said. They don't forget who wrote them. Her words followed me all day. When I got home, my stepmother's car was parked in the driveway. My stomach clenched. I hadn't invited her. The air outside smelled like wet pavement and perfume. She stood under the porch light holding a box of my father's belongings. I thought you'd want these, she said. Her voice was sugar-coated, but the eyes gave her away. I kept my distance. That's generous. She shrugged. I'm trying to be civil. For appearances, I appreciate the performance. She flinched, then set the box down on the porch. You think that piece of paper changes anything? He loved me. I took care of him. I met her stare. We both did. But only one of us forged his words. Her hand twitched almost as if to strike, but she lowered it quickly. You'll regret this. I already did, I said. That's why I'm fixing it. She turned and walked away without another word. The smell of her perfume lingered long after her car left the driveway. Inside the box were his glasses, 2 pens and a small brass key. I recognized it. It opened the old desk drawer where he kept insurance forms and receipts. I carried it to the study. The lock clicked open like it had been waiting. Inside lay a few envelopes, a calendar and one short letter in his handwriting. The date made my chest ache: 3 days before his final hospitalization. Asterisk. To whoever reads this first times, it said: times truth isn't lost, only delayed. Don't let fear rush it. Asterisk. The word steadied me more than any argument could. I folded the letter carefully, placed it beside the will, and whispered, I won't rush. The clock chimed softly from the living room. My reflection in the window looked calm, but my hands trembled slightly. That tremor wasn't fear, it was weight. Later that evening, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat by the window. The porch light flickered and the rain softened to a steady drizzle. I thought about how Dad used to time his evenings by small sounds: the percolator bubbling, the fridge cycling on, the clock striking 9. I opened my notebook and wrote: times. Noise fades, records remain. Asterisk. Then I added another line: times forgers rush. Truth waits. Asterisk. Somewhere in the rhythm of pen on paper, my breathing evened out. Before bed, I checked the folder one more time. The seal still gleamed steady under lamplight. The gold circle caught a faint reflection of my father's watch on my wrist. It felt like confirmation, a quiet nod from him. My phone buzzed with a new message. Mr. Blake, Times Court review scheduled Friday at 10. Bring evidence and witness statement. Asterisk. I texted back: Times confirmed. All documented. Asterisk. Then I set the phone aside, turned off the lamp and listened. The fridge hummed again, soft and low. That sound had followed me through grief, through doubt, through the long silence that fills a house after truth is spoken aloud but not yet believed. I thought of my father's words: time's freezer keeps things safe. Asterisk. Now I understood, he hadn't just meant food. He meant dignity. The rain slowed to a stop. The air smelled clean like a page just turned. I whispered, "You trusted me with silence, Dad. I'll let it speak." The mantel clock tapped once more. I felt no triumph, only purpose. Some people chase justice like it's a race. I'd learned it's more like thawing ice, you wait until the shape appears. Friday morning came gray and windless. I woke before the alarm, heart steady but heavy. Today wasn't the verdict, it was the foundation. Proof would speak if I stayed calm. I laid everything on the table: the sealed folder, Dad's letter, the photo of the freezer, the time-stamped message to my brother. Each item looked ordinary. Together they carried weight. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and metal. The fridge hummed its usual tune. That sound had become my anchor, reminding me truth had rhythm even when people didn't. Mr. Blake arrived first. He stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. "You kept it well," he said, nodding toward the evidence. "It kept itself," I replied. "Cold has its own loyalty." He smiled. "Let's document it properly." He laid out a form labeling each photo and object by number. I handed him the printed screenshots: the image of the freezer door open, the reflection of the envelope corner beneath the tray, the metadata showing the date months before the forged revision. "This is clear," he said. "Chain of custody intact. We'll make certified copies." As he spoke, I felt the old fatigue drain from my chest. It wasn't victory, only clarity. I brewed 2 mugs of coffee. The warmth steadied my fingers. "Linda's ready." "She confirmed," he said. "She remembers the day exactly." He insisted she notarize in duplicate. "Her log and stamp still match." "That's Dad," I said quietly. "Always a second copy." Mr. Blake set his pen down. "Are you prepared for how she might react?" "You mean Margaret?" He nodded. "She'll fight louder. But noise doesn't scare me anymore." He gave a small nod. "Good. Because by Monday we'll read both wills in front of the board." That afternoon I met Linda Marks at the church pantry. She wore her volunteer badge, hair pinned back, face calm like someone used to grief. The air smelled faintly of canned soup and Lysol. "I didn't think you'd remember me," I said. She smiled gently. "Your father made sure I would. He was stubborn about details." I handed her the photograph of the will. She leaned close, squinting through her glasses. "Yes. My stamp, my signature. I remember he joked that even heaven would need a notary." I laughed softly. "That sounds like him." Her voice lowered. "He wanted to be certain his daughter wouldn't be erased. He said families twist words when hearts cool." I swallowed hard. He was right. She signed a short affidavit Mr. Blake had prepared. "This confirms my witnessing," she said. "And if they question it, I'll testify." "Thank you," I said. "You have no idea what this means." She patted my hand. "Oh, I do. Truth has a temperature, it starts cold then warms the room." Back home I organized the papers again, labeling them with sticky notes. Asterisk. Original scanned copy photos. Witness affidavit. Asterisk. Dad would have been proud of the neat stacks. The afternoon light shifted through the curtains, catching the gold seal. The fridge motor clicked off for the first time in hours, leaving silence thick enough to hear my breath. I whispered, "Almost there." Then I remembered something: the brass key from the desk drawer. I unlocked the lower cabinet where he kept old receipts. Inside was a single envelope addressed to Mr. Blake. My pulse quickened. The date March 3rd, 1 month before the false version. I opened it carefully. Inside, a letter typed on Dad's stationery times. Attached are notarized copies of my final will and instructions for storage. Duplicate to remain at home for reference. If anything happens, please verify both seals. Asterisk. I pressed my palm against the page. He left breadcrumbs everywhere. I photographed the letter, then placed it in a new sleeve. The air smelled faintly of paper dust and rain through the open window. By evening my brother came by again. His expression carried more relief than fear this time. "She's been calling the lawyer nonstop," he said. "She told everyone you forged the notary seal yourself." "Let her," I said. "The real notary will speak Monday." He dropped onto a chair. "I can't believe Dad planned this far ahead." "He knew her patterns," I said. He used calm as his defense. He studied me for a moment. "You sound like him now." I smiled. "Maybe I'm learning the rhythm." He glanced at the papers spread across the table. "Want me to help?" "Just keep witness notes." Date time what we handle. He nodded, pulling out his phone to record. The faint click of the camera sounded almost ceremonial. Kitchen table papers spread beneath lamplight. I slide the affidavit beside the seal. If they doubt the story, they'll read the temperature instead. My chest tightens, then steadies. Monday, I whisper. Let's see who melts first. That night I couldn't sleep. The mantel clock tapped every second like a heartbeat outside my body. I walked to the kitchen, barefoot, cool tile grounding me. The freezer door gleamed under the soft lamp glow. For a moment I touched the handle, half expecting to feel his hand there too. The house smelled of rain and coffee gone stale. But it was peaceful. I opened my notebook and wrote times. Proof found, witness confirmed, chain sealed. Asterisk, then added times, forged, noise loses volume when facts arrive. Asterisk. I thought of my stepmother pacing somewhere, rewriting her own story to fit what people wanted to hear. I no longer needed to correct her. The documents would do that. At midnight I called Mr. Blake just once more. Everything's organized, I said. Good, he replied. Bring copies only, keep originals locked. Already done. You sound calm, he said. I am. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. There was a pause. That's exactly what justice should sound like. After the call, I poured water into a glass, watching condensation slide down the sides. The faint hum of the air vent filled the room. I thought about Dad's old saying, times cold keeps memory honest. Asterisk. He wasn't wrong. The freezer had preserved more than food, it had preserved intention. Morning arrived with quiet light. My brother met me by the car, carrying the copies in a neat binder. His hair was still damp from the rain. You sure we're ready? He asked. We're ready, I said. He opened the passenger door. I never realized truth could be this calm. It takes practice, I said. And one good notary. He laughed softly. You sound like him again. I'm starting to hear him everywhere. As we pulled away from the driveway, the sun broke through the clouds. The air smelled new, like paper just unsealed. I looked back once at the house, its porch quiet, its windows bright. It no longer felt heavy, it felt witnessed. The hum of the engine merged with memory, steady and sure. Monday would come soon enough, and when it did, the truth would already be standing in the room. I rested my hand on the binder and whispered, We're almost home, Dad. The clock in my mind ticked once, like acknowledgement. Monday came with a thin layer of fog over the courthouse steps. The air smelled like wet paper and asphalt. My brother and I walked side by side, binder in hand. Neither of us spoke much. Silence felt stronger than nervousness. Inside, the conference room buzzed with low conversation. My stepmother stood near the window, wearing gray this time, her grief freshly ironed. She didn't look at me, only at the folder Mr. Blake held. He greeted us calmly. Everyone present good. Let's start. Her lawyer, a younger man with sharp shoes and sharper tone, cleared his throat. Before we begin, my client maintains that any so-called second will is fabricated. Mr. Blake adjusted his glasses. Then this meeting should help us all. He spread the documents on the table, 2 wills side by side. One crisp and clean, the other wrinkled from ice and time. The gold seal caught the morning light. My stepmother leaned forward. That's water damage, not proof. Mr. Blake remained even. We'll let the notary confirm. The door opened. Linda Marks stepped in, steady as ever. She carried her logbook, the same one she'd shown me at the pantry. Mrs. Marks, Mr. Blake said, do you recognize this document? She adjusted her glasses. Yes. I notarized this on February 17th in John Carson's home. He was alert, deliberate, and insisted on duplicate copies. The young lawyer frowned. Can you prove that statement? She opened the logbook, showing the signed entry and stamp ID. That's my signature. My record. And the number matches this seal. The room went silent. Even the air vent seemed to hold its breath. My stepmother's face paled. You must be mistaken. He revised it later, he told me. Linda shook her head gently. If he did, no legal notary witnessed it. And I saw him sign this version with both hands steady. My brother exhaled sharply. Dad never changed anything after February. He was too sick. Her lawyer tried again. Do you have any personal stake in this outcome, Mrs. Marks? None, she said simply. I'm here because truth deserves its timestamp. Conference table documents spread like mirror images. I slid the frozen copy closer to the center. If they doubt the ink, they can trust the cold. My breath slowed as voices softened. Read the line with initials, I said. Mr. Blake read aloud. To my daughter, I leave the house and workshop as acknowledgement of years of care. The words hit harder than any accusation. My stepmother's lawyer rubbed his temples. She stared at the table, jaw tight. He was confused, she said, voice trembling. He didn't know what he was signing. Linda's tone stayed kind but firm. He read every sentence out loud before signing. He corrected a date himself. Mr. Blake looked toward my stepmother. Do you wish to dispute under oath? She faltered. No, not today. The younger lawyer gathered his papers, already avoiding her eyes. We'll need time to review. Take it, Mr. Blake said. But the record stands. The February will predates your version by 6 weeks. It will hold in court. The air eased like a long exhale. My brother reached under the table and squeezed my hand once. It's done, he whispered. Almost, I said. Let's end with civility. I turned toward her. I'm not angry. I just wanted the truth visible. That's all. Her shoulders dropped. He always favored you, she said quietly. No, I answered. He favored fairness. It just included me this time. Mr. Blake began collecting the documents. The gold seal caught the light again, warm against the table's dark grain. Mrs. Carson, he said gently. You'll receive notice of redistribution by the end of the week. She didn't reply. She simply walked out, heels clicking like punctuation marks. When the door closed, silence felt enormous. Linda smiled at me. He'd be proud of how you carried yourself. I only followed his notes, I said. He left a map. I just read it. Mr. Blake nodded. You handled this with dignity. Not everyone can. Truth doesn't need noise, I said. It just needs room to breathe. We finished signing witness statements. I packed the binder, carefully labeling each section. The room smelled faintly of ink and rain drifting in from the open window. Before leaving, I glanced at the 2 stacks of papers, the false version crisp and meaningless now, and the one Dad signed fragile but alive. I whispered, "Thank you for waiting." Outside, the fog had lifted. The courthouse steps gleamed wet but clear. My brother held the door open for me. You didn't gloat, he said. There's nothing to gloat about. Justice isn't a trophy. He smiled faintly. Then what is it? A mirror, I said. It shows who stays calm when everyone else breaks. We walked to the car in silence, rain soft underfoot. I could still feel the weight of the seal through the folder, a quiet pulse against my palm. Back home, I set the documents on the counter and exhaled. The fridge hummed again as if it had been listening the whole time. The house smelled of coffee and faint soap, the scent of closure, not triumph. I brewed one last cup and stood by the window. The rain slowed, catching sunlight in tiny beads on the glass. My reflection looked older, steadier but lighter too. Dad's watch ticked softly on my wrist. We did it, I murmured. The paper spoke. The words felt simple, true and final. After the hearing, the quiet felt heavier than before. Justice had landed, but silence remained, stretching through the rooms like fog that wouldn't lift. The folder lay on the table edges, drying after the morning rain. My brother had gone home and Mr. Blake promised to call once the redistribution was complete. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt hollow, like the moment after a long song ends and no one claps. The fridge hummed faintly. I followed the sound, half for comfort, half from habit. It reminded me that the truth had once waited there, cold and patient. The phone buzzed. A message from my stepmother. Times. You got what you wanted. I hope you're proud. Asterisk. I stared at the screen, then typed back, times I didn't want anything. Just accuracy. Asterisk. I didn't press send. Some sentences didn't need an audience. Instead, I closed the phone and walked to the porch. The air smelled of wet soil and coffee from the cup I'd left earlier. Across the street, a neighbor waved softly, uncertain whether to say congratulations or condolences. I nodded, nothing more. Dad used to say truth feels quiet because it works slowly. Maybe this was what he meant. Justice didn't come with applause, it came with space to breathe again. I sat on the porch steps and opened his notebook one last time. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still carried weight. Times. Order keeps the heart calm. Asterisk. I whispered, I'm trying. Inside, the old mantel clock tapped through the stillness. I realized the house had stopped smelling like grief, it smelled like paper and lemon, plain and alive. But exhaustion hit in waves. My body felt like a room that had been cleaned too many times. I poured another coffee, hands trembling slightly. The warmth steadied me. When my brother called that evening, his tone was cautious. She's packing, he said. Looks like she's leaving town for a while. Then it's finished, I said. He hesitated. You okay? I don't know. I thought proof would feel lighter. It will, he said. Just give it time. He was right. Proof doesn't heal, it clears the fog so healing can start. After hanging up, I walked through the house, touching familiar surfaces, the kitchen counter, the chair where Dad used to sit, the old freezer door still humming faithfully. The air vent whirred softly overhead, stirring the curtains. For the first time, I didn't flinch at the sounds. I opened the freezer again, empty now except for labeled soup containers. The cold air brushed my face clean and sharp. Thank you, I murmured. You did your job. I closed it gently as if sealing a chapter. Later that night, I visited the small community garden behind the library. Dad helped design it years ago. Rainwater sparkled on the benches. The air smelled of fresh earth and tomato vines. I sat there a long time listening to the quiet. A thought formed slowly, simple but firm: justice doesn't end with one correction, it continues in how we live afterward. The next morning I wrote to Mr. Blake. Once the estate closes, I'd like to donate a portion to a fund in Dad's name. Something to help families keep their records safe. He replied within the hour, Times. That's noble. He'd approve. We can set up the paperwork next week. Asterisk. The phrase made me smile. Paperwork again, fitting. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. The house needed movement. Dust floated like faint ghosts in the morning light. I opened every window. Fresh air drifted in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked wood and grass. By afternoon, I boxed up extra clothes, old receipts, and duplicates of documents we no longer needed. In the corner of the study, I found Dad's glasses and set them beside the framed will. The sight made my chest tighten. I whispered, we're all right now. The fridge clicked back on the same low hum that had marked every turning point in this story. It no longer sounded lonely, it sounded alive. That evening, my brother stopped by with 2 coffees. I thought we'd toast, he said. To what, I asked. To patience, he said with a small grin. We clinked cups like children playing adult. The bitterness of the coffee grounded me. She'll probably talk for months, he said. Say you tricked everyone. I don't mind, I replied. Let her have the noise. He nodded slowly. You're calmer than I've ever seen you. I think truth changes your breathing, I said. He laughed softly. Dad would have loved that. We sat in silence a while, listening to the fridge, the ticking clock, and the faint chirp of night insects outside. Ordinary sounds. Peaceful ones. When he left, I stayed by the window, watching the porch light flicker against the damp air. The yard looked simple, even beautiful in its quiet way. For months I'd carried anger like armor, thinking it protected Dad's memory. But what it really protected was fear, the fear that dignity could be stolen. It couldn't. It had only been misplaced for a while. I walked back to the kitchen and touched the folder on the counter. It no longer felt heavy. Just paper, clean, signed, complete. Dad used to say, times we don't win arguments. We preserve facts. Asterisk. I finally understood what that meant. I took a pen and wrote one last note in his notebook. Times. The freezer kept truth cold until we were ready for it warm. Asterisk. Then I closed it, slid it onto the shelf, and let the evening settle. The house was quiet again, but not empty. It felt witnessed. The final reading took place at the courthouse annex on a bright Wednesday morning. No rain, no fog, just clean light through tall windows. The air smelled faintly of polish and paper. I arrived early with Mr. Blake and Linda Marks. My brother stood beside me, calm for once. The documents were ready, authenticated, stamped, verified. This time there would be no performance, only record. My stepmother entered late, wearing sunglasses indoors. Her lawyer trailed behind, holding a thin briefcase that already looked defeated. She didn't meet my eyes. The clerk adjusted her microphone. Case number 246B, Carson Estate Verification Hearing. Mr. Blake began, steady and clear. Your Honor, we submit the original notarized will of John Carson dated February 17th and the contested copy dated April 2nd. The witness who notarized the earlier version is present. The judge nodded. Proceed. Linda stepped forward, voice firm but kind. I notarized the February document. I recall his condition clearly, lucid, deliberate, and insistent on duplication. The judge examined her logbook, then the seal. It matches. Thank you, Mrs. Marks. The young lawyer muttered, we request handwriting verification. Mr. Blake handed over a folder. Already done. The state's forensic examiner confirmed the signatures identical to prior filings. The judge looked up. Then there's no dispute. The February will stands as the lawful version. A wave of quiet spread through the room. My breath trembled but didn't break. Courtroom bench, sunlight on polished wood. I placed my father's watch beside the seal. If truth needed a witness, time would volunteer. My chest rose, slow, voice steady. Thank you for letting the paper speak. The judge continued, voice even but warm. Distribution will follow accordingly. Executor transfer to Miss Carson, primary heir as designated. My stepmother exhaled sharply. He didn't mean that, he was confused. The judge looked at her gently but firmly. The evidence disagrees. There's dignity in accepting closure. Her lawyer touched her arm, signaling silence. I turned to face her fully. You don't have to apologize, I said. Just rest. The truth isn't a punishment. Her eyes glistened but she said nothing. When the hearing ended, the clerk asked everyone to sign the confirmation sheet. The pen felt heavy in my hand, like the last word of a long sentence finally written. Outside, the sun caught the courthouse steps. My brother laughed softly. He would have loved this weather. He would have called it a clean day, I said. We walked slowly toward the parking lot. Linda caught my arm before leaving. He taught me something too, she said. That proof can be gentle. I smiled. You reminded me of that. She squeezed my hand and left with quiet grace. That evening, Mr. Blake stopped by to deliver the certified copies. The house smelled of coffee and furniture polish. He handed me a white envelope with embossed lettering. It's official, he said. The estate's in your name now. I didn't open it right away. Feels strange, I said. Like closing a book you're still reading. He nodded. That's how integrity works, slowly, without applause. Before leaving, he added, your father's file also mentioned something unusual, a line he wrote years ago. When proof finds peace, start something good with it. That night I sat at the same kitchen table where it all began. The fridge hummed softly, faithful as ever. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a witness who'd finally been heard. I poured 2 cups of coffee, one for me and one for memory. Across the table I imagined him sitting there, hands folded, eyebrows raised in quiet approval. I said out loud, we did it right, Dad. Calmly, like you taught me. The air seemed to respond with warmth instead of chill. A week later I stood in front of the small community center downtown. A banner hung above the door, ****, the Carson Family Truth Fund, helping seniors protect their documents. ****. We used part of the inheritance to create it. Mr. Blake helped set up the legal structure and the library offered meeting space. The idea was simple: free workshops for families on organizing wills, powers of attorney, and medical records. At the first session 20 people showed up. Some came with shoeboxes full of papers, others brought questions. One older man said, my kids roll their eyes when I mention a notary. I smiled. Then make them roll their eyes now, not later. Paper remembers better than people. Laughter filled the room, soft, real. By the end of the night we'd notarized 6 documents and scheduled 3 more appointments. Linda volunteered to help once a month. My brother handled logistics. The air smelled of fresh ink and strong coffee, the scent of beginnings. As we locked up I stood by the door watching the lights dim one by one. The silence felt earned this time. My brother asked, do you think Dad knows? Yes, I said. He planned for it. He smiled. You kept his boundary. Boundaries protect peace, I replied. He built one around truth. Outside the night breeze carried a trace of rain. The streets glistened under streetlights. I breathed deeply, letting the cool air settle everything that had burned for months. Later at home I opened Dad's notebook again. The last blank page waited like a quiet invitation. I wrote times when silence holds truth, it isn't empty, it's full of trust. Asterisk. I placed the notebook beside the framed will on the shelf. Next to it sat the brass key, the envelope, and the photo of the freezer. Artifacts of patience all in one row. The mantel clock ticked in rhythm with my breathing. I ran a hand across the counter, smooth and cool. The fridge hummed once more. This time the sound wasn't a reminder of loss, it was a pulse of continuity. I whispered, "You can rest now." The house didn't answer, but the quiet did. In the weeks that followed, the story spread quietly through town. Some called it poetic, others lucky. I called it complete. No revenge, no public speeches, just the truth signed and steady. I mailed a copy of the will to the county archive, attaching a note that read Times, for record and remembrance, asterisk. It felt right. That evening, as sunlight stretched across the living room, I brewed one last cup of coffee and stood by the window. The porch light reflected off the glass like a soft halo. Dad's watch ticked on my wrist. I smiled. The freezer melted their plan, but it also thawed mine. Justice, I realized, wasn't about punishment, it was about restoration. The air smelled faintly of rain-soaked wood and lemon polish, the scent of home reclaimed. When the papers were filed, the hearings closed, and every signature was verified, I expected celebration. Instead, what I felt was quiet. The kind that lets you hear your own thoughts again. For months my world had been about proof, dates, seals, folders, testimony. But when the noise faded, I realized justice isn't only about being right. It's about what you do once you are. I spent the first calm morning watering the garden behind the library. The soil smelled rich, the air soft. A robin landed near the bench where Dad used to sit. I whispered, "We finished it," and the bird stayed, tilting its head like it understood. The fund we created grew faster than I imagined. Families came with their paperwork, their questions, and their fears. Some brought their children to learn early. Others brought apologies, quiet ones, for mistakes made out of panic or pride. Each story felt like a mirror of ours, just with different names. One woman said, "I wish I'd known sooner that truth needs paper too." I told her, "It's never too late to write it down." The more I helped others protect what mattered, the lighter I felt. I wasn't guarding Dad's memory anymore, I was extending it. His calm way of solving things without shouting, without gloating, had become my compass. Sometimes people asked, "How did you stay so composed when they accused you?" I'd smile and answer, "Because the freezer didn't argue, it just waited." That became the lesson I carried. Silence isn't weakness. It's a form of strength that holds its ground until facts can stand beside it. At home, I still kept the same fridge humming through every season. Inside a single envelope remained a photocopy of the real will, laminated and dated. I kept it there not as evidence but as reminder. Truth doesn't expire, but it needs care. On Dad's notebook I added one last line, Times. Dignity isn't loud, it's accurate. Asterisk. The mantel clock ticked once, steady as ever. The house smelled faintly of lemon and coffee, the scent of order restored. As I sat by the window, I thought of how easily families can lose each other, not because of greed alone but because no one teaches us how to protect fairness. We learn to sign papers but not to read them, to speak loudly but not clearly. That's why I keep telling this story. Because every listener somewhere has faced their own version of the freezer, some truth buried under noise, waiting for patience to thaw it. If there's a message in what happened, it's this: keep your documents safe. Keep your tone calm, and when injustice tests you, let truth take its time. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly in a kitchen where a daughter once stood holding a cold envelope that changed everything. The house is warm now. The paperwork complete. The lesson: simple love is proven not by inheritance but by integrity. I turned off the kitchen light and whispered, "We did it, Dad." With grace. Outside the evening settled soft and clear. The world didn't clap, but it didn't need to. Some victories are meant to be lived, not announced. If this story reminded you that truth and patience still matter, I hope you'll stay with us. Subscribe to True Tales, where real dignity finds its voice. And when you're ready, start the Inheritance and Elder Dignity playlist for more quiet stories that speak loud in the heart.